believe it or not, but this is not a cinema camera. In fact, I have my eyes on one, but I'm just not able to get it yet. But no, this is not a cinema camera. But also, if you're curious about the cinema camera that I'm going to buy eventually, unless somebody sponsors me, the camera is the Canon C50. This is my absolute dream camera right now, and for the foreseeable future. But now, even though this is not technically a cinema camera, I am still able to produce an image that looks like this. Yeah, you see that? This is all done with the Canon R10. That's right, the camera that is powering this rig is the Canon R10. I've talked about this camera in multiple different videos now, but like I've been saying, it's not a cinema camera. It's not even close, actually. But now to fully understand the type of image you can get out of the Canon R10, you also have to understand what it can't do. There are a lot of features that this camera does not have. And just to rattle off a few features that this camera does not have, it can't shoot in log, it doesn't have internal NDs, it doesn't have a good dynamic range, it also doesn't have in-body stabilization, which cinema cameras typically don't anyways, but you know, still a caveat. This camera is just lacking a lot of features that would help it to be a more professional video camera. Not to mention that it has a small battery, it overheats, and it also doesn't have a cinema menu. Like, you don't have shutter angle in this camera. It's just shutter speed, which is okay, but you know, it's not ideal. I also completely forgot to mention, but this also has like no low light capability. If you start pushing the ISO past 2000, it really starts to just get super grainy. Like, it's not very fun to shoot low light with this camera. It's almost impossible. Luckily, I have a lot of practice, and I've been able to utilize DaVinci Resolve to try and get the best image out of this camera in low light situations, but it's just really, it's not easy. It's not much fun at all. So here are some of the things that I have done to fix these problems with this camera. Now, first of all, I got a variable ND filter. Now, it's a spherical ND filter that just goes on the end of your lens. So, you know, it's not super convenient when you have a matte box on your lens, but you gotta do what you gotta do. So the ND filter has been a game changer. And I mean, you can change your aperture, but you're not gonna get the shallow depth of field you want. So I like to lock in all of my settings. My ISO stays at 800 because that's the base ISO. My shutter speed always stays at 50 because I shoot at 24 frames a second. And I try to keep my aperture as low as possible because this lens doesn't really have a low aperture, so I'm trying to keep it as low as I can. But really the most important piece of gear on this camera for when I'm shooting outside is the ND filter. So this one's fairly cheap. I'll put a link in the description to this ND filter or one very similar. But I would recommend getting an ND filter if you're a photographer or a videographer. If you're shooting outside, you're gonna need an ND filter. Now next, and this actually isn't even a piece of gear, this is a setting inside of my camera. So in your Canon R10, you don't get to shoot log, which really sucks because, you know, that means that you don't get as much dynamic range, and also you don't get as much flexibility in color grading. But Canon did something interesting with the Canon R10 called HDR-PQ. Now, I've made another video about this, and you should definitely go watch that, but HDR-PQ is basically the Canon R10's version of log. As long as you're shooting in a standard profile, it will be pretty grayed out. It will be very similar to log. It will give you increased dynamic range, and it will give you increased flexibility in your color grading. Now, it's not log. It just isn't. There's a lot of limitations to HDR-PQ, but it's the most similar thing you can get out of the Canon R10. So when I found out about it, I was pretty happy because it did give me a bit more flexibility, but you know, it's not log, unfortunately. But you can shoot in 10-bit, so that's a plus. I know I said I was only gonna talk about the gear that helps me produce the best image out of this camera, but really it's that setting and the ND filter that really help you create the image you want. So I'm gonna talk about the other things I put on this camera to try and make it a cinema camera. So to compensate for the lack of any type of heat dissipation in the camera, is that the right term? Am I gonna leave that in the video? So to compensate for a lack of any airflow in this camera, any fans, I have a small rig fan right where the LCD screen goes to try and cool off the camera because it gets rather warm. And the fan does help, but I can still overheat this camera with that external fan, unfortunately. so that's not great. To compensate for the terrible battery, I have two V-mount batteries on the back of the camera. Now one is like solely to power the camera and the fan, and then the other one is for anything other than those two, so that I can basically get like a full day of shooting on this camera without having to worry about any battery life. I don't have a gold mount or a gold mount battery, so that doesn't affect me, but you're gonna commonly see V-mount batteries. So I have a Small Rig 99 Pro, and I have a New Era 55 watt, or it might just be a 50 watt battery. But both of these are great. Industry standard. You'll see V-mount batteries on so many different cinema cameras. That or gold mount. Gold mounts are even more industry standard. Now, the LCD screen on this camera is teeny. It's not big. So I went and got a 7-inch monitor, which, if you know anything about camera monitors, you typically can get a 5-inch or a 7-inch. Some companies make like a 4-inch, I think, and other companies can make like a 8-inch. But I got a nice 7-inch monitor, which is perfect. It gives me a crystal clear image, inputs 4K, outputs 1080p, which is fine. It's from Portkeys. I've made a couple videos about the Portkeys monitor. Check them out. I really love the brand. I will most likely be getting all of my monitors, hopefully most of my monitors from Portkeys, because I've loved the brand and how much functionality I get with it, even though I don't get any like control over my camera with it. But that's the camera's fault. That is not the monitor's fault. This monitor can control other cameras, just not mine. It is what it is. I just need a new camera. Once again, sponsors. Anybody want to sponsor me? It's like, just shy of $7 grand to get the camera and the lens I need, plus an SD card and a Civ Express Type B card. The other great thing about this monitor is that if I was using a different camera, like if I was using a Sony, because almost all the Sonys can work with this camera wirelessly, or a couple different Canons, most of the cinema cameras from Canon work with this camera either with a cord or wirelessly. So really, I shouldn't need to upgrade this monitor for any particular reason, unless I just had the funds or was given a monitor and could use it with those cameras. But this monitor works flawlessly with like a bunch of different, cameras, so super helpful. But then really the last step in using this Canon R10, this camera rig, to get a good image is knowing how to color grade it. As long as you're making sure that all of your settings are set correctly while you're shooting, so that everything's exposed properly, your white balance is set correctly, your motion blur is right because you did the right shutter speed, stuff like that, you're gonna get a decent enough image that you can then fix in post. Now, obviously, we wanna do as much work in production as we can so that we don't have to do as much in post, but when it comes to color grading, that's really where you like do all the fine tuning and get the look that you want. So I've learned a lot about color grading with this footage. I know now that when I'm using this camera, I would rather have it be a little bit underexposed opposed to being any overexposed. If I have any highlights that are about to clip, I would rather bring down the exposure enough so that those aren't clipping, so that then in post, I don't have to deal with clipped highlights. Now, sometimes this is just unavoidable. Like there's nothing you can do to not have clipped highlights, and that's unfortunately because this camera doesn't have great dynamic range. But if I can shoot with the image being a little bit darker, I find that I can bring up the exposure of the darker areas and still have unclipped highlights so that I can get the look that I want. And Canon already has really good color science, so that helps with coloring. But even just doing a conversion from the HDR PQ to Rec 709 already makes a difference, and then doing all the fine tuning, I'm really able to dial in the look that I want. It does help that I've practiced for 4 years of color grading the Canon footage, and then the last year consistently color grading the HDR PQ. But really, the look that you get out of your image is done in editing anyways, and that goes for any camera. I believe that you can use any camera to get the framing you want, but then it also comes down to your lighting to dial in the color. But you really go into all the little details in the color grading. But that's all I got for you. So if you found this video helpful, maybe consider following, maybe even click the like button. Follow because I said so, and also there's gonna be more videos about color grading and probably this camera until I get a new one. So now go off, use your Canon R10 or whatever camera you have, learn how to color grade, make something, and have a nice day.
I'm still here. all the smoke clear, I'm still here.